Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. It started with a stormy night in a small cafe tucked between two old brick buildings downtown. The clock had just hit midnight when the door creaked open and a tall man stepped inside, rain dripping from his coat. He looked like any other stranger seeking warmth and coffee, but there was something in his ice and authority he tried to hide behind that calm smile. Elena, the night barista, wiped the counter and greeted him with a polite nod. She had seen countless late-night wanderers, but none like him. His suit looked tailored, far too fine for a man who claimed to work part-time at a cafe. He sat by the window, watching the rain blur the neon lights outside. When the cafe finally emptied, he spoke without looking up. "Marry me," he said quietly, sliding a small envelope across the counter. "Think of it as a contract." Elena froze, the steam from the espresso machine curling in the silence between them. "Excuse me? Is this some kind of joke?" she stammered. The man lifted his gaze, his blue eyes steady. "It is not. I need a wife and paper. You need money, and a way to keep this cafe from closing. Let us help each other." His voice carried no arrogance, only certainty, as if this proposal was the most natural thing in the world. Elena laughed in disbelief. "You think I would marry a stranger just because you asked?" He reached into the envelope and placed a check on the counter, the ink glinting under the light. The number made her breath hitch. "Why me?" she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Because you are the only one who looked me in the eye this week without asking for anything." For a moment, time hung still. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint drip of rain, even the city outside seemed to disappear. Elena crossed her arms, searching for words that made sense. "Who are you, really?" The man's smile deepened, but his eyes turned distant. "Someone who has everything but cannot be seen having love. Someone who needs a promise temporary, not forever." She stared at him, torn between fear and curiosity. Every instinct told her to walk away, yet something about him felt disarmingly honest. The cafe clock ticked once, echoing like a heartbeat. Finally, she whispered, "If this is a joke, it is a cruel one." "It is not," he said softly, his tone almost pleading now. 3 months. A private arrangement. No strings. You will not regret it." The envelope sat between them like a bridge no one dared to cross. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and Elena wondered if saying yes would ruin her life or save it. He extended his hand, patient, confident, waiting. And for reasons she could not explain, her trembling fingers reached out to touch his. "Fine," she said, her voice barely audible. "But this is just business." The corner of his mouth lifted. "Agreed." What she did not know was that the man across from her was no ordinary barista at all. He was Alexander, the hidden crown prince of Aldenmark, running from the throne he never wanted and about to fall for the woman who dared to treat him like a man instead of a title. The next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the city washed clean and glittering under pale sunlight. Elena woke up wondering if the strange conversation in the cafe had been a dream, but when she opened her bag, the envelope with the contract and check was still there. Her heart pounded. The man Alexander had disappeared before dawn, leaving only a note on a napkin: "Meet me at noon at the Belmont Hotel. Bring the contract." She stared at the neat handwriting, a mixture of elegance and control, and against her better judgment, curiosity pulled her in. At exactly noon, she walked into the marble lobby of the Belmont Hotel, feeling completely out of place among the crystal chandeliers and men in tailored suits. A familiar voice called her name. "Elena." He was already there, dressed in a perfectly fitted gray suit, no trace of the humble barista from the night before. "You look nervous," he said gently. Would you like some coffee? She crossed her arms, trying to hide her unease. You really meant all of this, did you not? He nodded. You sign, and everything we discussed will be handled immediately. Your debts, your cafe, your security. He gestured to a lawyer who placed the contract on the table between them. Elena hesitated. What are the rules? Alexander smiled slightly. 3 things. First, you must stay by my side for 3 months. Second, no one must know this marriage is a contract. And third, he paused, his eyes softening. You cannot fall in love with me. The last line hung in the air like smoke. Elena let out a nervous laugh. That should not be a problem. Her voice sounded braver than she felt. She took the pen and signed, the ink trembling under her hand. The lawyer folded the papers and disappeared. It is done, Alexander said quietly. From today, you are my wife. The words sent a chill through her. Within hours, she was sitting in the backseat of a black car, heading toward the Aldenmark Embassy estate on the city's outskirts. It was not a palace, but it felt like one white stone walls, sprawling gardens, and staff who bowed as Alexander walked past. Elena's simple jeans and worn sneakers drew curious looks, but he offered his arm without hesitation. You belong here now, he whispered. That night, her new life began. A personal stylist arrived with racks of clothes. A strict etiquette coach introduced herself as Madame Clarice. Elena struggled with curtsies, silverware, and endless rules about posture and tone. Every mistake earned her a polite correction, and every success drew a rare smile from Alexander. You are learning faster than I expected, he said during dinner, cutting his steak with effortless grace. You sound surprised, she teased. I learn quickly when the alternative is embarrassment. He chuckled softly, his first real laugh since she met him. It startled her warm, human, almost boyish. For the first time, she saw more than the businessman in a suit. Days turned into weeks. They attended charity luncheons, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, and photo calls. To the world, they looked like a perfect couple. In private, they barely spoke. But sometimes, when cameras were gone, she would catch him staring at the stars from the balcony, lost in thought. You could tell me who you really are, she said one night, handing him a cup of coffee she had made herself. He looked at her over the rim of the cup, his expression unreadable. One day, he said, when you no longer see me as a stranger in a suit. He turned away before she could ask more. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering who she had married and why a man with eyes full of secrets would choose someone like her. Outside, the city lights shimmered, and for the first time, Elena felt both protected and trapped at the same time, standing at the edge of a world that did not feel like hers but somehow was starting to feel like home. Weeks later, Elena's days began to follow a strange rhythm: early mornings filled with etiquette lessons, long afternoons shadowing Alexander at public events, and quiet evenings in the vast house where every echo reminded her how out of place she was. Yet, something about him kept drawing her closer. He was disciplined, polite, and distant, but sometimes when he thought no one was watching, she caught glimpses of something else: loneliness. One evening, she found him in the study, sitting by the fireplace with a newspaper folded beside him. You missed dinner, she said softly. He looked up, weary but kind. I had business. She smiled faintly. You always do. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled, painting gold across the sharp lines of his face. You do not belong here, he said finally. You belong somewhere people laugh loudly and forget to care about rules. She tilted her head. And you? Where do you belong? His gaze lingered on the flames. Nowhere. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. She wanted to say something, anything, but the sound of footsteps interrupted them. Madame Clarice appeared at the door. Mr. Carter, she said, using the name Alexander adopted for the press, the charity gala is confirmed for next Saturday. Elena nodded. Then I will make sure to embarrass you properly, she joked. He smiled, brief but real, and for a heartbeat the tension dissolved. The night of the gala came faster than she expected. The estate buzzed with stylists, photographers, and black cars pulling up under chandeliers. Elena stood before a mirror, wearing a silver gown she barely recognized as her own reflection. "Do not slouch," Madame Clarice reminded her, adjusting the necklace. "Tonight, you are Mrs. Carter." Alexander appeared in the doorway, dressed in a classic tuxedo, and for the first time, Elena saw the full weight of who he was. "You look beautiful," he said simply, offering his arm. As they stepped into the ballroom, the crowd turned, cameras flashing like lightning. Reporters whispered, "Who is she? Where did she come from?" Elena smiled, her heart racing. When one journalist pushed too far, asking if their marriage was real, she reached for the silver tray of coffee that had just passed by and said calmly, "We may be new, but he still insists on my coffee every morning." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Alexander looked at her, a spark of admiration in his eyes. For the first time, they moved as one. Later that evening, after the guests dispersed, Alexander found her on the balcony overlooking the city. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said. "You made them forget their questions." She leaned against the railing. "That was the idea. Besides, who can argue with caffeine diplomacy?" He laughed quietly, the sound warm against the night air. "You saved me out there." She looked at him, half teasing, half sincere. "Then perhaps you owe me one." His expression softened. "I owe you more than you know." The wind tugged at her hair, and she shivered slightly. Without thinking, he slipped off his jacket and draped it over her shoulders. The scent of cedar and espresso surrounded her. "You will catch a cold," he said. "You sound like someone's husband," she murmured, smiling. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, there was no distance, no mask, only a quiet understanding neither could name. But the moment broke when his phone buzzed. He looked down, his jaw tightening. "I need to take this." As he stepped away, Elena turned back to the city lights, the weight of the jacket warming her shoulders but leaving her heart unsteady. She did not know it yet, but the world outside that balcony was about to turn their quiet arrangement into a storm that neither contract nor promise could contain. The call that interrupted the night on the balcony changed everything. From that evening forward, Alexander grew quieter, more guarded, as if a shadow had settled over him. Elena noticed it in the way he spoke less during breakfast, and how his eyes drifted elsewhere during meetings, and how he sometimes stood by the window long after midnight, staring into the dark. One morning, she walked into his study with 2 cups of coffee and found him closing his laptop abruptly. "You work too much," she said, placing the cup beside him. "You should let me help." He shook his head, forcing a smile. "This is not the kind of work I can share." "So that is how this marriage works," she replied softly. "You handle the secrets, and I make the coffee?" He looked at her then, really looked, as if realizing the hurt behind her words. "You knew what this was when you signed that paper," he said quietly. "A contract." She swallowed hard. "Yes, I did. But that does not mean it has to feel like prison." She left the room before he could answer. That night, her frustration spilled into her dreams-crowded faces, flashing lights, people whispering her name. She woke up gasping, the sound of thunder outside echoing her heart. Days passed, and preparations for another event filled the estate. Madame Clarice rehearsed every greeting, every smile, until Elena felt like a puppet. "Remember," Clarice said, "people will try to test you. Hold your posture. Do not react." Alexander appeared at the doorway in a tailored navy suit, looking every bit the prince he was pretending not to be. "Ready?" he asked. "As I will ever be," she replied. The car ride to the venue was silent, save for the rain tapping against the windows. When they arrived, cameras flashed again, brighter than ever. The gala hall shimmered with chandeliers and polished marble, but there was tension in the air. As they made their way through the crowd, Elena overheard 2 reporters whisper, "She is not from his world. There is no way this marriage is real." Her fingers tightened around her clutch. She had been warned not to react, but her pride burned. Before she could speak, Alexander's hand brushed hers under the table, a silent plea to stay calm. Hours later, as the music swelled, he leaned closer and said, "You have done well tonight." "You say that as if it surprises you," she whispered. "It does not," he said, "but it still matters." For a moment, it almost felt real, their smiles, their synchronized steps, the way their eyes met across the room. Then, as the evening drew to a close, a tall man approached them with a sharp grin. "Your Highness," he said mockingly, his tone laced with venom. Alexander froze. Elena looked between them, confused. "I believe we agreed that name would not be spoken," Alexander said under his breath. "It seems secrets travel fast," the man replied, smirking. "A prince pretending to be common, marrying a white dress, it makes quite the headline, does it not?" The world seemed to tilt. Elena's heart dropped. "A prince," she repeated, her voice barely audible. The man chuckled. "He did not tell you? My dear, you are married to the future king of Aldenmark." Gasps rippled through the nearby guests as the whisper spread like fire. Photographers turned, flashes exploding. Alexander stepped forward, his jaw tight. "That is enough." But it was too late. The secret was out. Security rushed forward, but Elena could barely breathe. The room spun, voices blending into noise. She turned to Alexander, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal. "You lied to me." "Elena, please, do not," she said, stepping back. "Do not call my name like it means something to you." The cameras caught every word, every tear. She ran past the crowd, through the golden doors, into the rain. Alexander followed her to the steps, calling her name again and again, but the storm drowned his voice. He stood there, the rain soaking through his tuxedo, watching the woman he never meant to love disappear into the night. Rain poured through the city as Elena ran without direction, her gown heavy and cold against her skin. Every flash of lightning lit up the posters already spreading her face across headlines, "The barista who married a prince." By the time she reached her small apartment above the closed café, her body trembled from exhaustion. She shut the door behind her and leaned against it, gasping for air. The ring still glittered faintly on her finger, a symbol she could no longer bear to look at. In the silence, her phone buzzed again and again, messages, calls, the world demanding answers. She turned it off. The next morning, news trucks lined the street below. Journalists shouted her name through the rain. She drew the curtains and pressed her forehead against the cool glass. "You should have told me," she whispered to herself, anger and heartbreak twisting together. Days blurred. Customers stopped by the locked café, only to find handwritten signs, "Closed until further notice." At night, she sat by the window, replaying every moment, his gentle smile, his lies, the way he had said, "You will not regret this." But she did. Across the city, Alexander faced his own storm. The royal council demanded an explanation. Advisors warned that his secret marriage had endangered the monarchy's image. His father's voice thundered through the grand hall, "You have humiliated this crown for a woman who does not belong in our world." Alexander stood tall, drenched in shame but unyielding. "She did not humiliate the crown," he said. "I did." He walked out before the argument could continue, ignoring the cameras waiting outside the palace gates. For the first time in his life, he chose not to hide. Reporters chased him as he returned to the café, now surrounded by flashing lights and curious onlookers. But Elena was gone. The shop was empty except for the faint smell of roasted beans and a cup sitting on the counter half full, as if she had left in the middle of a thought. He picked up the cup, his reflection rippling in the dark surface. "You once told me coffee could fix anything," he murmured. "I hope you were right." He searched for her for days. When he finally found her, she was volunteering at a community shelter, serving meals quietly with her sleeves rolled up. She looked tired but free, stripped of the chaos his world had brought. He waited until the crowd thinned before stepping forward. "Elena." She froze, the ladle in her hand trembling. Slowly, she turned. He was no longer dressed like a prince. His coat was simple, his expression weary but sincere. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "To apologize," he said. "I should have told you the truth from the start. I thought hiding who I was would make me human in your eyes. But I see now it only made me a coward." She stared at him, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. "You turned my life into a spectacle. You made me a headline." "I know," he said softly. "And I cannot erase that. But I can tell you this: every word I said to you, every smile, every touch, was real. The contract may have started it, but the love was never part of the deal. It just happened." She closed her eyes, the truth colliding with the ache she had carried for days. "You cannot just walk in here and fix this with words," she said. "I am not asking for forgiveness," he replied. "I am asking for a chance to prove that what we had was not built on lies." Silence stretched between them, filled only by the hum of the shelter's old refrigerator. Finally, Elena whispered, "If you want to prove it, do something real. Use your name, your power, your influencito, something that matters." He nodded once. "Then I will." And with that, he left, leaving her standing there with a storm inside her heart she could no longer deny. She did not know that his next move would shake both their worlds again. In the days that followed, Elena tried to convince herself that the chapter with Alexander was over, yet his words echoed through every quiet moment. Meanwhile, the world buzzed with rumors about the prince who vanished from the royal palace and the woman who had stolen his heart. News anchors speculated, tabloids invented stories, but none of them knew the truth: that Alexander was fighting not for power, but for redemption. 2 weeks after their confrontation, a televised press conference appeared on every channel. Elena was wiping tables at the shelter when one of the volunteers turned up the volume. The screen showed Alexander standing at a podium surrounded by reporters. His suit was formal, but his eyes were steady. "I will not hide behind the crown any longer," he said. "I married Elena Brooks because she reminded me that titles mean nothing without integrity. The monarchy has made mistakes, and it is time we give back to the people we claim to serve." Gasps filled the room. Elena stood frozen, a tray in her hand, as she watched him announce the creation of a new initiative, the Open Hands Foundation, funded by the Royal Treasury to support small businesses and independent cafes across the country. "This project," he continued, "was inspired by one woman who taught me that every dream deserves a second chance." The crowd of reporters erupted in questions, but Alexander's gaze never wavered. For the first time, the prince was speaking not as a symbol, but as a man. The news spread everywhere. Some called it madness, others called it courage. Elena could barely breathe. Her co-workers stared at her, speechless. "That is you, is it not?" one of them whispered. But she did not answer. She just grabbed her coat and ran into the street. That evening, she stood outside the cafe she once managed. The windows were dark, the tables covered in dust, but there was a new sign hanging on the door. It read, "Reopening soon under the Open Hands Foundation." She stepped inside slowly, the air still carrying the scent of roasted beans. A familiar voice came from behind her. "I thought this place deserved to live again." She turned, and there he was, Alexander, standing in the same spot where he had once handed her a mysterious envelope. He looked different now, lighter somehow, like a man freed from his own walls. "You did this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You told me to do something real," he said. "So I did. This cafe will be a training ground for people who need a fresh start, just like you once gave me a chance when I did not deserve it." She shook her head, fighting tears. "You could have done this without telling the whole world." "Maybe," he said quietly, "but the world needed to see that love can be more than scandal, that second chances belong to everyone." For a long moment, they stood in silence, surrounded by the hum of the city outside. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small silver key. "This belongs to you," he said. "You built this place. I only restored it. She hesitated before taking it, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent a familiar warmth through her, the same one she had felt that first night in the cafe. "You do not owe me anything," she whispered. "I know," he replied. "That is why I am here." The truth hung between them, soft and undeniable. For the first time in weeks, she smiled a small, hesitant smile, but real. "So what now?" she asked. He looked around the cafe, his eyes glinting with quiet hope. "Now," he said, "we start over. No contracts, no secrets, just us, and coffee." The faint hum of the espresso machine filled the silence as Elena turned the key in the door, unlocking not just the cafe, but the future waiting on the other side. The cafe reopened 3 weeks later, filled with the warm aroma of freshly ground beans and the hum of quiet conversation. Elena stood behind the counter, wearing her apron again, her hands steady but her heart uncertain. The sign above the door now read Royal Blend, a name Alexander insisted on as both a tribute and a promise. Every table was occupied by locals, students, and workers who had heard about the place from the news. They came not just for coffee, but for what it represented, a story of forgiveness and renewal. Alexander worked beside her, rolling up his sleeves and learning how to steam milk properly. Customers whispered, amused to see a prince making lattes. "You missed a spot," Elena teased one afternoon, pointing at a streak of foam on his wrist. "I am improving," he replied with mock seriousness. "At this rate, I might earn a promotion." She smiled, shaking her head. It felt easy again, natural, like they had found their rhythm in a world that no longer judged them. But peace rarely lasted. A sudden headline broke across the morning papers: Royal Council demands annulment of unauthorized marriage. The article accused Alexander of violating constitutional law and tarnishing royal credibility. Elena read it in silence, her chest tightening. "They will not stop until they erase me," she said quietly. Alexander took the paper from her hands and tore it in half. "Let them try," he said firmly. "I am done living by their rules." Yet, even as he spoke, she saw the flicker of worry in his eyes. That night, she found him sitting alone outside the cafe, the city lights flickering around him. "You cannot fight the entire kingdom," she said gently. "If staying with me means losing everything, you should not have to choose." He looked at her, his voice steady but low. "Do you think I care about thrones or crowns? I care about you." The honesty in his tone shook her more than the storm of attention ever had. "They will come for you," she whispered. "Then let them," he said, his hand finding hers. "I would rather lose a crown than lose you again." For the first time, she saw the weight of his choice, the price of loving her openly. When dawn came, news crews gathered outside once more, expecting a statement or scandal, but instead, the cafe opened as usual. Alexander served coffee to everyone who walked in, smiling as if the world beyond those doors did not exist. By noon, the media began calling it the morning of defiance. Inside, Elena watched him move through the crowd, calm and unafraid, and realized that his rebellion was not loud or angry, it was simply love, lived without apology. That night, as they closed the cafe, she whispered, "Whatever happens next, I will not run again." He looked at her, eyes soft under the glow of the sign above them. "Then we face it together." The door clicked shut, but for once, the world outside no longer frightened her. The following week, the tension between the royal family and Alexander reached its peak. News cameras surrounded the palace gates as rumors spread that the king himself would revoke his son's royal title. At the cafe, Elena tried to keep her focus on customers, but every notification on her phone carried another headline about the growing crisis. When Alexander returned that evening, his expression was unreadable. "They have given me a choice," he said quietly. "Either annul the marriage or renounce my claim to the throne." The air left her lungs. "Alexander, you cannot," he stepped closer, his voice calm but resolute. "I already did." The room fell silent. The words hung there, soft yet impossible to ignore. "You gave up everything," she whispered. "No," he said, reaching for her hand. "I finally chose something for myself." The truth of his decision hit her harder than she expected. He had traded centuries of power for something as fragile and uncertain as love. Before she could respond, the door swung open. Madame Clarice stood there, rain dripping from her coat. "Your Highness," she began, then stopped, correcting herself. "Alexander. The council will not back down. They plan to make this public tomorrow." "Let them," he said, his tone steady. "I am done hiding." Clarice looked at Elena, her eyes softening. "Then make it count," she said, before leaving as quietly as she came. That night, Alexander appeared on national television again. The cafe was closed, the lights dimmed, and Elena stood in front of the screen with her arms wrapped around herself. He stood before a sea of microphones, dressed in a simple dark suit, no crown, no symbols of royalty, just a man. "My name is Alexander Carter," he began, "and for most of my life, I believed duty meant silence. But silence built walls between me and the people I was meant to serve. I fell in love with a woman who reminded me that leadership is not measured in titles, but in courage." The crowd was quiet. "I will no longer be called prince, nor will I sit on any throne. From this day, I serve the people through the Open Hands Foundation, and I stand beside my wife, Elena, not as royalty, but as her equal." His words swept through the country like a wave. By morning, the public sentiment shifted. What had been scandal became inspiration. People filled the streets holding signs that read, "A prince for the people," and "Love over title." At the cafe, Elena could not stop the tears. When Alexander returned, the cameras followed him to the door, but he stopped at the threshold and turned to the crowd. "This is where it all began," he said simply, before closing the door behind him. Inside, Elena waited by the counter, her hands trembling. He walked to her slowly, the chaos outside fading into silence. "You really gave it all up," she said, her voice shaking. "Not all," he whispered, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I still have you." She leaned into him, and for the first time since it all began, she did not feel like she was part of a fairy tale gone wrong. She felt like she was home. A year later, the cafe stood brighter than ever. The morning sun poured through the wide glass windows, painting the walls in gold. Royal Blend had become more than a business, it was a symbol of change. Travelers came from all over to sip coffee made by the former prince and the woman who taught him how to be human. Elena arranged fresh flowers on the counter while Alexander fixed the chalkboard sign outside that read, "Open Hearts. Open Hands." Life had become simpler but infinitely fuller. There were no bodyguards, no flashing cameras, no royal commands, just laughter, the scent of roasted beans, and the quiet joy of belonging. That afternoon, a group of students came in, wide-eyed and curious. One of them pointed to the framed photograph hanging on the wall. It showed Alexander and Elena standing side by side during the foundation's first opening ceremony. Beneath it, a small plaque read, "Love is the only contract that never expires." Elena caught the student's smile and felt her chest warm. She turned to find Alexander leaning by the door, wiping his hands on a towel. "They still think you look like a prince," she teased. "I will take that as a compliment," he said with a grin. "You always did." She walked over and rested her hand on his arm. "Do you miss it? The palace, the title, the power?" He shook his head slowly. "Sometimes I miss the quiet gardens," he admitted. "But then I remember that here, with you, I am free. That is worth more than any throne." The day carried on, busy yet peaceful. When evening came, the last customer left, and the city outside glowed under the soft haze of streetlights. Alexander locked the door and turned the sign to "Closed." Elena was cleaning the counter when he approached with something small in his hand, a single espresso cup, simple but elegant, with their initials engraved on the side. "What is this?" she asked, smiling. "A reminder," he said. "No contracts, no crowns, just coffee and forever." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "You and your coffee metaphors." "It started with one," he replied. "Seems right to end with one too." He poured 2 shots, the steam curling between them like a promise renewed. As they clinked their cups together, he whispered, "To us." "To second chances," she answered. The sound of their laughter filled the cafe, blending with the hum of the espresso machine. Outside, a light breeze carried the scent of roasted beans into the night. Somewhere beyond the city, bells from the old royal chapel rang faintly, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as a quiet blessing for what was found. For Alexander and Elena, the story that began as a contract had become something neither law nor lineage could define: an honest love that needed no title, no ceremony, and no crown. Just 2 people, 1 promise, and a forever brewed with kindness.